my goodness! What the hell is wrong with DC fans? I mean, it's no secret that Zack Snyder's Superman and most of his DC cinematic universe is kind of a acquired taste. Now, some people have valid reasons for not liking it. It's just not their cup of tea. But you got so many ignorant DC fans within the mix. And I use the term fans loosely because there's so many of y'all who just don't know anything about DC, and it shows. Very often, whenever I hear anyone complaining about Man of Steel or BVS, I always hear the same crap. Zack Snyder didn't read the comics. Zack Snyder doesn't understand comic book characters. Zack Snyder didn't understand Superman. His Superman isn't Superman. Out of all the Superman directors, Zack is the one who didn't read any comics. Blah, 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 bullshit! Those videos you see, those statements you hear, they cannot be any more wrong. It's those people who don't even read comics that are quick to say when something is not comic book accurate. Because if you did read comics, you would know that Man of Steel is very comic book accurate. So many people hate the fact that Superman killed General Zod in that movie when Zod was about to kill some civilians. Y'all say Superman would never do that. He'd find another way.
Superman always finds a way. In the comics, he always stops Zod. Always. And I'll let you know, Zod tears stuff up. Zack Snyder could have done one thing to fix that. Right in the Phantom Zone projector.
That's not a part of the character or his growth. You said in comics, Superman always stops Zod without killing him. So, I'm just gonna assume you've never read the Supergirl saga from 1988, where Clark came to the realization and had to accept that there are some people you cannot save. Now, the general told him to his face, basically, no matter what he did, it didn't matter. He vowed to come to Earth and he would destroy it. He would never stop. So Superman made a choice, which was the hardest thing he's ever had to do. And he killed Zod and his people, exposing them to kryptonite until they died. And he even mourned them. He did this in comics. Killing the general was one of the hardest things he's ever done. But y'all don't read comics. Y'all watched cartoons as a kid and then see stuff like this and say it's not comic accurate. No, what you mean to say is it's not Cartoon Network accurate. It's not Superman the Animated Series accurate. Killing Zod was crucial to Clark's character. Even in the comics, years after this incident, the Spectre tried to throw that shit back in Superman's face, and we found out on the inside that broke Superman. It was the first time he couldn't find another way, and he did something that harmed him as a character. But this was needed for the character to grow. You don't learn anything from always winning. Just like in life, sometimes you have to lose in order to come back stronger. And Zack Snyder understood that. What it is y'all used to the older prime versions of Superman who always finds a way and inspires hope. But what y'all fail to understand is you don't get this version without the younger version of Superman who made hard choices and had to learn how to lose. Even General Zod's motives in Man of Steel with the World Forger destroying Earth and making it into a new version of Krypton. That was taken from New 52's Last Son, which showed Zod as a visionary who planned for his people's future and berated Superman for trying to live a normal life. Now, the bulk of this movie, I'd say 85% of it borrows heavily from Superman Earth 1, one of my favorite runs of Superman in comics. Man of Steel's entire structure is lifted from this miniseries. Now, it's non-canon, but it gives us a Clark Kent that's going from job to job, low on money, alone, often depressed because he doesn't know who he is or what he is. He doesn't fit in anywhere. And there are so many lines from Man of Steel taken from this comic. We see flashbacks of his childhood, just like in Man of Steel. He was bullied in his youth. There's even a part where invaders came to Earth targeting Clark, and Superman had to use the ship that brought him to Earth against them. Once the world was saved, Clark got a job at the Daily Planet and started wearing glasses. Man of Steel is identical to Earth 1. I loved this story as a kid. Superman Earth 1 is actually what made me get more into Superman comics. When I read that, I was like, oh, Superman isn't a boring character. This dude's got depth, even somewhat relatable even. Zack Snyder gave us a comic accurate Superman. It's just not the comics y'all read, or maybe it's not the comics you liked if you did read them. And some will say, oh, well, these comics are non-canon and they're old as shit. Buddy, it doesn't matter how old they are. They're called classics for a reason. I mean, you have a movie that came out in 2018 that borrowed heavily from a comic book that came out in 1991. Don't play with me. Now, was everything from Man of Steel comic accurate and good writing? No, I'm not saying it was. Everyone loves to bring up this scene where Jonathan died in a tornado for seemingly no reason. And I'll be honest, I don't like it either. I never liked it. If Jonathan Kent was going to die, I think he should have died from a heart attack. But I would much rather he lived. I actually like it when both of Clark's parents are alive and in his life, even as an adult. But even this is something silly to complain about, because people will say Clark letting his father die is a departure from his character. Oh, you mean like how Batman strapping a bomb to someone is a departure from his character? And I know what you're typing in the comment section right now.
In what comic book did Superman let his dad die in a tornado?
Okay, in what comic book did the Joker kill Thomas and Martha Wayne? In what comic book did Bruce stop being Batman after only 2 years of crime fighting? When did the Stormbreaker axe ever belong to Thor in comics? When did Thor ever make Stormbreaker and use it against Thanos? What comic does Tony Stark create Ultron? When did that ever happen in comics? What comic shows the Mandarin to be Shang-Chi's father? They're not related in the books. Movies always changes up things or puts their own spin on stuff. Sometimes it works, sometimes it's peak writing, and sometimes it's absolute shit, like Thor, Love and Thunder. Oh my goodness, I could compare Thor, Love and Thunder to the comics. There's no comparison. The comics are a million times better. But even though I don't like this scene with Jonathan dying from the tornado, I still understand it. Clark's dad didn't want the world to see who Clark was, because Clark wasn't ready for that. He didn't even know who he was. He was an angry teenager. He wasn't ready for the consequences and responsibilities of exposure, and Jonathan believed the world wasn't ready for him, so he did what he thought was right. I don't like it. I think they could have did that much better, but I understand it. But when people say that Zack's characters in his universe are not comic book accurate, when people say Zack didn't understand these characters, I think that is the most ignorant thing. If you don't like his take and his versions on stuff, fine. I actually don't like a darker Superman. I prefer the more light-hearted Superman, just like I don't like a light-hearted, colorful Batman. I prefer the more darker, psychologically damaged Batman. But if somebody made a colorful, campy Batman, I wouldn't say he doesn't understand comics. No, there are comics that he pulled from the 1950s and the 1960s. You can't say that Zack doesn't understand comics because you never read comics. We saw a Batman who wore a suit ripped right out of the pages of Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns story. And Batman killing criminals is something he used to do in his Golden Age stories. You also have to remember that this is a broken version of Bruce Wayne that lost Dick Grayson. And because of that loss of his son, Bruce is much darker and more vicious on his war against crime, just like he was in the comics after Jason Todd died. Now, Batman wasn't killing anyone, but again, this movie puts their spin on it. And again, Batman did occasionally kill criminals in his golden years. So I don't see a problem with Batman occasionally killing in a movie. I actually thought it was badass and refreshing. That warehouse fight, I mean, he was breaking necks and cashing checks. I loved Snyderverse Batman. All of Snyder's stuff was heavily lifted from various comic books, canon and non-canon. There are scenes that came from Superman Peace on Earth that were used in BVS Dawn of Justice. There's stuff taken from New 52. The whole Justice League lineup in the Snyderverse is taken from New 52 with the exception of Green Lantern, who was supposed to be in that movie. There's stuff taken from Dark Knight Returns. The Batmobile Mark II is taken part for part, tire for tire, from Dark Knight Returns. The depressing version of Cyborg, who wanted to die rather than live as a human computer, comes from New Teen Titans. This was a tragic character who hated what he was and hated his dad in comics. But again, y'all are used to the cartoons where he's the life of the party. He's cool. He says booyah. Y'all watched cartoons as a kid, and then you talk about something that's not comic book accurate when it is comic book accurate. But again, the problem is you grew up watching cartoons. You didn't read these comics, because if you did read these comics, you wouldn't say, oh, it should be like this. I hate this. This isn't comic book accurate. What do you mean it's not comic book accurate when it's ripped from the pages of a comic? If you don't like these movies, you don't like the direction, the stories, or acting, that's fine. That's your opinion and you're entitled to it. But the statement, Zack Snyder doesn't understand these characters, or Zack ruined the characters, are all wrong. The fact is, he did understand these. He pulled inspiration from stories he liked. They're just not stories you're familiar with. But that's not his fault. The fact is, I think that Zack's universe and his ideas were too far ahead of its time. Man of Steel came out in 2013. I mean, it was just too ahead of its time. You know, not many people understood it. More people, especially in the nerd community, are getting into comics now, and we're finding out, holy shit, this dude did know what he was doing. But at the time, it sucks. It sucks because we'll never get to see. I love the Snyderverse. I loved it. I loved Dawn of Justice. I liked Man of Steel. I loved Suicide Squad. Nobody likes Suicide Squad with Will Smith. I love that movie. I loved it when I first saw it. I was like, this is the best Suicide, this is perfect. But nobody else liked it. There are a few problems with it. I don't like their take on Killer Croc. They went with like the earliest version of Killer Croc from the comics. Like, out of all the way Killer Croc has been depicted in comics, you go for the earliest version. I would have liked to see the more badass, buff, crocodile looking monster with the tail. I would have liked to see that personally. But it is what it is. Zack's universe is over. The Gunverse is coming, and this Superman looks like it's about to be the greatest Superman movie that's ever come out, and I can't wait for it. But just like James Gunn understands these comics, he's pulling from stories that he likes with his Superman, like All-Star Superman. Zack did the same thing, and people need to really start putting some respect on Snyder's work, because it's actually a lot better and a lot more comic book accurate than y'all give it credit for. But let me know what you guys think down below. If I've opened your mind a little bit, maybe let me know. I would highly recommend all these comics I've talked about, especially Superman Earth 1. It's one of my favorite Superman stories of all time. But yeah, let me know what you guys think down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.